Oh, welcome to the Node.js Next 10 meeting, the first one of the year. So welcome everybody to the new year. We'll follow our standard approach of looking at what we've tagged in the agenda. That agenda was an issue 185. But before we get into that, does anybody have any announcements they'd like to share?
Maybe just should we take 5 minutes to talk about, do we have some kind of collaborator summit in Vancouver in May?
That's worthwhile announcing, yeah?
Yep.
Do you want to give the details?
I don't have, maybe, yeah. So the conference will be held in Vancouver and linked to, so there will be a track for the OpenJS and other open source summit, if I remember correctly, on everything and multiple topics. It should be held in Vancouver between the 10th and 12th of May this year. And we should be running some kind of collaborator summit, but I'm not really sure when. Is it before, after? And because I didn't
I think it's the plan is the 9th.
Okay, great.
Before the event, okay.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that was in the announcement, but
oh, I didn't saw that in the announcement.
Yeah. I mean, on the announcement, I don't think there was already a date for the collab summit, or was it?
Yeah, I think it was only the OpenJS part, track, and stuff like that.
Right, okay.
And CFP.
Anyhow,
I know, actually here, in this announcement here, oops.
We don't have an issue yet for the planning of the collab summit, right?
Yeah.
We might.
It actually says it will also host its cross-project council collaborator summits.
Yes, and the May 9th. Oh my God, how I missed that. ADHD for the win. Cool. But yeah, we don't have an issue yet for the planning of the collab summit, right? Okay, cool. Is it?
Yeah, we still have a few months, but yeah, it's good to actually get that going sooner than later. So
yeah, I can create. Is there any template we follow? Otherwise, I can just create one new cross project. No, it's not in the cross project console. It has.
There's a summit repo.
Yeah, exactly.
And usually it's managed in that summit repo.
Summit, yeah.
And I think it would be good to like maybe talk to like maybe reach out to Waleed, because he's helped organize a bunch of the previous summits. So it might be good to talk to him and just see if he's up and has time to plan to be involved in this one and to sort of coordinate opening issues and stuff with him.
Sure.
Great. Yeah, you want to do it?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I actually tried to write a message, but I think he's still in holiday, so we'll just bump. No.
Okay.
Okay, that sounds good. Any other announcements or things that we should let people know? Okay, if not, let's move on to the agenda items. The first one was the metadata proposal for docs. I think we discussed in the issue itself that we should start it with that one, and then whatever time's left over, we can look at some of the others, right?
Yeah.
So I think Claudio is, do you want to lead the discussion on that one?
Yep. So since basically what we talked on the metadata proposal issue, let me just grab the link for the issue. Look, I think the open topic was to create a a demo repository, and yeah, I shared here in the chat the demo repository. I can also share my screen if that makes sense. Loop.
Yeah,
so
makes sense.
Cool. So basically I try to structure, the repository in the way how it would, as much as possible, look how it was if it would be inside Node core, Node.js Node. So, inside you have the doc folder, then you have the API folder. Then the main difference is that you would have, well, V18, V17, V16, maybe just for the future versions, but the idea was to, start to do some versioning together with the releases. So the docs, they have their own release. That happens also when you make a new release of Node. So instead of having a dedicated tag for everything, like the code and the docs, because right now, if I want to make change, suppose that something was updated, security update on Node.js v14, and I needed to change also the docs, I would need to make that commit to be included in the tag. I would need to republish forcefully the tag v14 or something, and it doesn't really work also because the if I recall correctly, the website, the way how it builds the things is that it will just get the latest version, so it will never update previous versions with the docs at all. But I might be wrong on that.
I guess that's going to introduce a significant change in addition to all the other changes, right? Like today, it's all versioned with Node. It's published with Node. We're going to require a whole new flow for publishing and.
Yeah, publishing, when we're talking about publishing docs, I'm talking about, publishing to the website, because if I recall, the doc is also added to the tarball of Node. So that's something. But to be very honest, we can keep the current flow if it works well, if we don't actually have issues. Just imagine that there might be an issue, if I need to make a retroactive update to a doc, page.
I don't think we've ever had that problem. Like, we haven't had it enough to ever change. I guess I'm always like minimum change. And like, this is something that if we made the argument and wanted to change it, we could do it. But I wouldn't necessarily, like, the more of those major things you have to discuss when you propose a change, the harder it's going to be to get through that discussion. And because like I can see people saying, well, wait a sec, now you're going to have multiple copies of all the docs, right?
Yeah,
because there's different versions. And well, what if we need to make a change? I guess, like,
yeah, no, that's
yeah,
and makes a lot of sense. That's why just an example.
Yeah.
I think then we all agree here that it makes not sense, at least for now, to discuss this and land this. So I will also update the example accordingly. But then ignore the V18 here now. So okay. So the first thing that the tooling would read, when trying to build the docs is the main navigation entry. So the main navigation file, basically it's a regular Markdown file. So differently from the current tooling that the navigation gets generated basically by reading the folder structure recursively, it is a Markdown file that you can just define what you want. This has the benefit that you can give the ordering that you want. You can have subsections, you can separate things. And the way how the navigation system works is that, well, you can have plain entries that go directly to files. So for example, this is, core embedding.md as one part of the documentation, but you can also add an entry that goes to another navigation file. So what happens is that the build system, when it sees, oh, you adding on another navigation, it will embed the contents of that navigation to the, older navigation. So what it allows, of course, is that, you will have a navigation just for file system, for example, just for buffer, for each module, right, defined on their own directory. And then the tooling will be, efficient enough to recursively load all those things. The benefits of this is, of course, you have, the navigation file respective to each module or thing, their folders. You don't need to update one central point. It's easier to read, easier to manage. Yeah. So for example, if I wanted to change, for example, position the whole file system, navigation tree, I would just move this line to somewhere else, not need to change a bunch of lines, and double check if everything is okay. So it's a small diff. But besides of that, it will just support all Markdown features. So you can add links, lists, headings, sections. Of course, there will be a limited amount of, what it can do, because that when converted to HTML, for example, heading will be a section, for example. A list will be a collapsible list or something like that. So, each Markdown, element will be mapped, for example, an actual HTML element, that we have styled and done. For example, talking about the HTML generation. For JSON, well, for JSON, it will, be something different. It will just be a tree, or graph, whatever you think. Yeah, that's basically how navigation works. I also added notes here to explain how this whole thing works. If you ever curious to read afterwards and you just, crash landing on this without context at all, everything that I explained right now here can be understood by reading this. Then we have an example of, a file about this documentation. So if we see the raw file, but it looks like basically the same thing. You will notice the difference is that instead of having YAML inside here, for example, I want the stability overview, or I want to add a stability index, you will see that it is like an GSX, or MDX, whatever you name it, fashion. So, instead of adding, a big YAML and wondering about tabbing, or anything else, is just a regular component that then it's rendered afterwards. Like this is basically replaced during the build system, to the actual thing, both for JSON and HTML. And then going deeper, for example, we have modules, for example, crypto, right? So here we have an actual more complex example. So we have the navigation of crypto, where you have, all the explanation of what is happening, for nodes of how the navigation system works, then some files, for example, module crypto, class. One of the things that, just to recap, that was presented here is that, classes will now be in their own file. So instead, for example, file system right now on API docs is this huge web page, a huge Markdown file that is, compiled in HTML as, 60 megabytes of HTML. And, by separating in, each class is its own thing, it's also easier, to contribute, to maintain, and etc. Here we have an example of a simple YAML file. So this is for the index page. So first going to the index page to explain the YAML. Basically, you have the name of the module, you have your snippets, things as, like the current thing. You have everything that you need. But
right. So if I go to the existing crypto.md, that content will look. Actually, here, let me see if I can see the raw file content.
Of course, it's cut, but basically the idea is that the index file is a summary of the module. Like it's before the first class. So we see that I cut exactly before we start the first class of the crypto module.
Yeah.
And then, for example, suppose the first class is, I don't know, certificate. Just going back to the index YAML, basically here we have the name of the module, stability, source, tags. This is not going to be auto-generated by the build system. This is something that is a feature of it, but we need to add. And the idea here is that keywords that when I use a search system, easy to identify, what you're trying to search for.
Is that like, are those tags, like, does it still do a full text search, or do those tags get, how does that part work?
So the idea is that, for example, if you're searching for crypto certificate, create, whatever, right? So for the certificate here, it will have certificate, digital certificate. So it will try to do, text inferencing. So it will also try to search by the headings of your, document file. But the tags are like, it will first try to see if there's any tag matching on your phrase. So for example, if your phrase has creating digital certificates, creating certificates, we will still first look to the tags, because it could be that, if your search pattern becomes too complex, or the words that you're using doesn't match anything on the headings, so it will try the combination of it.
Right. So these are additions to also searching on the
Additions.
content
Like the
itself.
tags themselves do nothing. Like they're just part of the metadata. But this is part like implementation part on the website, for example. Or even, for example, anybody that consumes a JSON and they want to do anything. This is not part of the build system. Just to mention, I'm just saying one of the use cases of tags, keywords, or whatever. Yeah, and then you have the history, when it was added, in which versions it was added. Yeah.
The okay, and I guess the metadata for each class. Well,
It's
like that
also
index
separate.
that
For example, this is the metadata for the certificate class, right?
right. But there was the inline metadata. What was that inline metadata?
Yeah, the inline metadata was transferred to here. So on each Markdown file, after each heading, you have that YAML inline code block. That is basically what, or conversion tool will like snap that on the Markdown file and convert into this, right? So here's an example, for example, here it's a static method, history, when it was added, versions, pull request, details. And here, this is something cool. This I'm also going to try to make the conversion script to generate, basically by using, the name of the module, the name of the class, type of thing. So it's a method, it's in the history, which position the array. So all of this is automatically generated. What this means is that, for example, this details here, you can see here, certificate and a JSON, right? So this is a translation file that can be used on Crowdin, for example, or even manual translation contributors directly in the repository. What this allows is that, while we have descriptions of the changes and other things that are in the YAML or other parts that, we don't want non-code, like people that are not savvy in code or YAML or whatever, but just want to translate whatever that is. So this is, this is EQ compatible, this is crowding compatible, this is compatible with our internationalization standards.
Right. I did that. The previous part though, I still didn't quite follow. So can you go back to the file that has the inline metadata? So
originally the Markdown files had the YAML here, so they would like after class there would be an inline metadata here.
Right.
This is not here anymore. This is like snapped to that search
right
page.
But there was somewhere, like, you showed us a file that still had that in it.
No, maybe it was a code block that you like there's no other pages with YAML, like,
okay, the stability index.
Yeah, but that's something different. This is like a component.
Right.
But this
Just
is also
wondering,
an example. Like here, it would also be a translation bag, for example. like instead of being a text, it will be like translation key.
I see. So, okay. So that has nothing to do with stability index. That is simply something to support.
Yeah, it's
translation.
like a visual components. Like basically this is like an HTML element, right? So what we were doing is that this on the original Markdown would be a pre-tag, but pre-tags not necessarily mean, you know, it needs to be a stability index, but the current coding system, basically any pre-tag, you know, like quote will become a stability index. So here I'm basically saying, hey, let's just have a specific thing called stability index, right? Let's not mix Markdown with HTML because the current build system basically transforms that pre-tag into an element which is called stability index, which has styling, etc. So people don't need to worry about this right here. And I think translators would understand, like we can even document, hey, if you see anything that looks like an HTML tag, like this, or we can say, hey, stability index is something that you should not touch. If you want to touch translations of it, you know, translations will be here, whatever. Like not in this line, like instead of having, let me just give an example. Forgot to actually do this. It will be just like API about stability index example 0. Because here about this documentation, this is like examples. Like for example, this stability index is different from, for example, what you saw here. Where is it? Oh, it didn't add it here. Maybe here. Oh, I forgot to add it here. But I think here I added it, stability, yeah. So this is usually what all classes will use. Like they will have stability and then their stability level, right? Like about this documentation, an exception, because it kind of invokes all the possible stability indexes. If you even read the stability indexes are as follow. So basically here we're embedding all the stability indexes as a component.
Right. Where was the original version of that file? So about this documentation, is there an equivalent to that?
Yep. So we'll go here.
Okay, documentation.md. Okay.
Yeah. You will see that this is what it's doing.
Right. Okay.
Using pre-tags. And that's, yeah. It's also important to mention that in the actual, like current documentation, that's how it does in every documentation. It will put the stability as a pre-tag on the beginning.
Right.
But the
Do we
thing
have
is
cases where it's also just on the method and the class? I guess so, right?
Yeah, it's directly here. Like sometimes they make a stability of the whole module, but you can also have stability of different classes, right?
Right. And even methods on those classes, I suspect, right?
Yeah, I just forgot to actually add them on the examples here. Like for example, modules, buffer, blob, the DMO. Forgot to basically just add it like stability. I don't know, deprecated. I know that it's not. I'm just giving an example.
Sure.
Yeah,
but then also you could put that. So that's on the class, right? Or is that the, and then the methods down below?
You could also do it. You can also put in the methods.
Okay. Okay. So that's basically in, right. That's where that's what confused me. I thought there was some metadata somewhere else, but then also in there, but okay. Now that's around the inline stuff was purely around translation and the other case. Okay.
Also, for example, some cases you have a constructor. So, you know, methods is not the only thing that we support. We also support constructor, right? Because class might have constructor. And there's also another one called constants, which maybe I added here. sections. Yeah, just sections. So for example, on the CLI document, like here we're talking about the CLI, but CLI doesn't have methods, right? CLI is options. So basically another thing that we support is just sections. Like these are just like sections of the Markdown document. So methods is basically like telling to the tooling, hey, this is a specific part of the API of that module, right? Like methods and constructor and constants. But sections, hey, these are just sections of that Markdown file that they also happen to want to have embedded to our metadata system.
Okay.
Because on the case
So we
of
use the same thing for like functions, like the Node API doesn't have classes, but it has.
Then you have a root, you know, methods, and it will not be a class. Like it's still the same thing. It's just a sections is the main difference between sections and methods is just like for them basically telling, hey, this is not part of anything, you know.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, yeah, if you want to go back to where you were with the other one.
Yes, for example, certificate. So yeah, so for example, the history, you have the entries of the history. Then for example, each method has, you know, params, you know, then you have the name of the params. Then you have returns because, you know, methods can have overloading of you know, their return type or whatever. So yeah, basically everything that you need to know, like the types, the params, it's optional, you know, the defaults, you know, the details, what are its types, you know, all these things. You know.
Right, and those today aren't necessarily anywhere, right? Or do we have them? Let me look at the.
So that's interesting. So for example, if I go actually to the example, an actual example, we go to buffer. What you will see is if I go to class, class blob. So here, if you have a method, you have this method, but you also have this.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Right. So we do have it there.
Yeah, but it's like in a list fashion, but basically it's the first list usually after the YAML. So this is mandatory. You see, like it's a thing that every method needs to have this. It just sometimes written in a different way. So here's where it will be the hard job of, you know, understanding, you know, how it works, because for example here you have the params, right? And then there are types. And then again, params and their types. Don't have any return type here. But in this case, you have only one param. Then it's just a type. So that's a thing. And that's why, for example, switching to YAML, of course, there will be cases that it will miss. And that's why I'm going to manually make the conversion tool to warn, hey, I wasn't able to correctly identify with precision what are the types or whatever params of this method. So we can fine tune it. But basically one of the reasons why the metadata helps it is it guarantees and enforces one way of doing this. Like just here we found already 3 different ways of people documenting the params and types and return types of, you know.
Sure. Yeah. No, it'll like, so basically it'll extract the type and just have the description, right? And then you have to put the type in the other document.
Yeah. It's basically, yeah, exactly what you mentioned. You have all the types here, you know, all the things here. And if you want to have a text description to be followed, sure, you can have on details. Oops, wrong file. Yeah, like.
So is that like, does that replace all the parameters?
Sorry, what do you mean with replace?
So like if we look at the original, like if you go back to, okay, so go back to the class and we look at the export challenge in
Which
the actual, like export challenge in the domain markdown.
domain?
But well, in the file that has export challenge, like there's something that has a the description, right? Like I think it's in the crypto, like in your new crypto file or your whatever the class file you were looking at a YAML file, right?
Yeah, I think it was blob.
Okay, so then if we look at the blob, is it index.md that has the content? What has the actual content?
Of the blob is blob.end.md.
Right, okay, so basically none of the parameters are in there.
Yeah, they will basically append them.
Right, okay.
And that will become like, and that's the cool thing because then we can style it as we want. And I think one nice way of styling it, which is straight to the point, is as a table. Because then, you know, people don't need to read where on this, because for example, if I go here, Node.js.org, API, buffer.html, okay, want blob slice. Here, it is straight to the point. It's good. But sometimes you have a lot of text, and you're like, where is the type? I mean, for me, it's easy to know. I know that here it's where it's, you know, it's talking about, but
right.
For example, here. But for some people, it might not be as easy to realize that this exact list here, it's talking about the parameters and the return types, and etc. Even though if I actually read carefully, oh yeah, that's it. But if I'm just quick scrolling, where is it, right? So, you know, having that actually indexed, also that's another thing that, you know, the TypeScript team had a hard time with, because the current JSON doesn't really put that well there. So they have a hard time with actually inferring this.
Sure, yeah, I can see it'd make the parsing much easier. So yeah, if you can go back to your example, I was just trying to understand this, like, what are the key differences? If I'm writing text, if I'm writing the docs, what's going to change for me, right? And so obviously one thing is today, all I do is I edit the one file, right?
Yeah.
So
now
today I would
two
edit
files.
the blob.en.md and the blob.yml, right?
Yeah. So basically, if I want to add a new method to blob, I would just, you know, new heading, a description about it, make a section for it, and then I would go to the blob MO. I would honestly just copy an existing one and just change what I need.
Right. Yep.
Right. So I would just add a new entry here if I have a new method, you know.
Right. Okay.
Of course.
And then these index. So what's the index?
Index is like the
file?
name file. Like, for example, if I mentioned here,
Right.
now you have the
okay.
module buffers in the classes. So the main difference is the index, like the summary. Like it's
right. Yeah, it can be the
here.
like, yeah, we've got some text that's not related to methods or classes or anything.
Yeah, it's just like talking about buffers and card encoding, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
type. This is before any class.
Right.
And I think this whole thing is big enough to be its own thing, right? Big array. And this is just a summary. So the index.yml is usually to be like index. The moment that I open blob, this will reject me, and will also render below that or after that, you know, the table of contents. So if I click class blob, it will redirect me to the page class blob.
Right.
So one course that entails that the links on the new versions will be different, right? The new doc system will have different links for classes. Like the interesting part of the, you know, if I go to, suppose we have the new build system in place, everything is already converted, it's live.
Yeah.
Go nodejs.org/API/buffer.html. It will be a valid link and it will redirect me to the summary of buffer.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
But then if I want to, you will see, oh, where's blobs? Well, now it's /buffer/blob.html. And those are the new links. But
right.
but still, if people that know all the links, they will still land to that corresponding module. Right.
Right. What about if you had taken the link, which was an index, like, because you can say on buffers iteration, there's a link which will take you to a link
to the
on the
section
page.
of it, like if you put the hashtag, that will lead you to anywhere. That's an issue. Yeah.
Right.
What we could do is we could generate, like if you add a hashtag, it could either be on Markdown, like the hashtag is like an ID, and it could redirect you to the section of the table of contents that it was originally the thing.
Right.
So instead of, for example, right now the generation is that if you see here, you will have an ID which is hidden, right? And that's how, for example, they get those things, buffers and iteration. So the idea is, if I enter this, instead of going to buffer and iteration, it will go up to the table of contents, buffer and iteration. Because the table of contents on the buffers.html will still be there. The main difference is now the ID will be in the table of contents.
Yeah.
Right. So
so maybe that would be.
Here I need to click. Is there one extra step of clicking to then to the page where it is, for example, if it's not in that page? But that's just for the classes, which is of course
right. So that might mean though that like the switchover would have to be tied to a Semver major version or something like that.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, it doesn't make sense to add in version 18, not even 19. I mean, once we release this, I think it makes sense to be on a Semver major,
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So if you go back to the table of you had the. I mean, and really, in theory, you could generate one big file if we wanted to. Right, like you could generate with the new. Not that I'm not saying that we would do that, but like if somebody really said, well, no, it has to be the same links or something, I don't know, which doesn't. The generator using the new files could still, instead of putting them in separate files, it could put them into one big file. Like there's nothing technically.
Sure, the generating the end, they could just append all the different files in one final HTML. That's also an alternative.
Because really, this just gives us more flexibility in how we
and control over how we want to do things in the end.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not a big issue. Yeah. But
so if you go back to the example, like the directory example, because I think that's like the key thing we wanted to sort of communicate was, here's what the experience will be that's different in terms of editing the docs, right? And so it's those two. So basically, instead of editing the one file, you'd edit the blob.en.md and the blob.yml.
One thing, not sure if you noticed, but the .n.md implies that you will have multiple blob.md files, like blob.r.md, blob. jp.md. And for the tooling, what it means is that we will not by default have, of course, all the files translated, not at all, not even regenerated, which are just copy of the English version. This means that if there's no available version of the language, we'll fall back to English.
Right, okay. And then the index is the summary, the blob is like and what's the blob.en.json?
That's like the...
Okay, that's the translations.
Yeah, like for example, that are referenced here. So the good thing is that translators don't need to learn how this here works, because it could be too much of a steep learning curve. They only need to worry about translating this, which is like basically
okay.
Or crowd in, which is even in an EY, so even easier. It's compatible.
And this would be, but this is assuming that, like, say, if we look at blob.en.md, the content in there, that's like, in that case, that's not translated, right?
What do you mean? this here.
Okay, so right, so I guess it's back to you don't translate you don't externalize every string.
No, like this, to translate this, I would just have a blob.fr, for example, .md, and then translate the text.
Right, okay.
File. So this doesn't get outsourced to a JSON file, no.
Right.
What goes outsourced to a JSON file are those strings here.
Okay, right.
Because it's counterintuitive to have them here and then have multiple versions of them, or to have a blob.n.yaml, blob.fr.yaml, because the metadata
Right,
is
sure.
Just the strings that change. Yeah.
Right, okay. So it's you translate the full files just like you would otherwise, but the things that come from the metadata.
You would in the JSON. Yeah.
Right, okay.
You would always have a blob.fr.json.
Sure, yeah, okay.
So that's why it's even more important to have, subdirectories, because if we had just the plain directory, that would be spammed with a hell of files, retranslation. But basically, suppose that I want to add, a new class.
Yeah.
So first, I will need to modify the navigation and the new class entry. I could put in whatever order I want, right?
Yeah.
Then I add a file, right? You don't necessarily need to have a .yaml file. The thing is that you only need a .yaml file if you're actually going to put metadata in it. So if you see, for example, about this documentation doesn't has a corresponding.
Sure, yeah, okay, yeah.
But if you're adding a new class, it makes sense because you wanted class to be. So basically, about this documentation doesn't get converted to JSON. That's an important thing because it doesn't have metadata. The important thing is that all the JSON files, when generated, they will not read anything from the markdown files. It's all from the metadata. Because the metadata is actually, the technical thing of it. The markdowns are just human readable description, etc. Yeah.
Did you think at all about, like, you kind of got to know based on the trailer what's in the, like, I just wonder, like, if like blob-content.en.md and blob.metadata, I don't know what other people think, if that would be more obvious.
The naming? Yeah. One thing about the names of files, I actually could name this whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
Like, the thing is that what needs to match is that the JSON files and the YAML file need to have the same name, but I understand, like, if you want this to be like explicitly like this is blob.metadata.yaml, yeah. If you put a dot, sure.
Right, okay, then you're okay.
Like how the building tool would know that these three files, blob and JSON, blob and MD, blob YAML are related is by the prefix.
Right, okay, so those that has to be the same.
I mean,
that was my only thought, like, when I saw them, is like, would some keyword help
we
people
can
understand?
do blob.metadata.yaml, then blob.content.end.md, blob.translations.end.json, so that they don't need to think that, okay, YAML is always metadata, MD is always content, JSON. We can add as many suffixes as we want, right?
I think for me, that would be like more obvious, right? Like you immediately, when you look at the directory, you'd immediately see, okay, here's where I'm going to do the metadata, or here's where I'm going to do the.
Yeah. Since we're getting into the final minutes of this meeting, I wanted to ask, because there will be definitely more things to discuss, and I also need to update this according to what we talked today. But does anybody also has a question, like John, Rui? Do you folks have? Because Rui, you also contribute a lot in the core. Like, I think on the call, besides of Michael and you, the only that actually contribute to the core very often.
I just have one question, not directly linked to, let's say it's still linked to the documentation part. And when do we want to do after for the internationalization? Because we just talked like 2 minutes ago quickly. Do we want to have a way to have everything on the same website, in which case we will maybe have an issue because we will have a blob.en.md and a blob.fr.md and stuff like that? Or do we want at the end to deploy on subdomain like let's say the English documentation will be, I don't know, doc.node.js something. The French one will be on fr.documentation, fr.doc.node.js. That's what was done by React with a subdomain. So what do we want to do?
So what you can see, for example, to Node.js.dev, what we just was the following is if we just put /API. Oh, okay, this is a problem client side, but it should actually redirect. Is that you would have, because in the future the idea is the docs, the API docs, they will be hosted directly on the Node.js.org website. Like they're not built in different places. So the idea is that you have .fr, yes, I mean there is no yes language right now, but by default, the idea is that if I just put /API on Node.js.org, it will redirect you to /n API.
Okay.
Right. So this is a part of the Nginx configuration. So once the API become part of the main Node.js.org website, this is actually done.
Okay, but so it's done by an Nginx rules on that. So basically, we could deploy each documentation could be a different website stuff, and just the Nginx configuration is redirecting to one or another.
I mean, the thing is that here what we have is that basically, if you don't put any language, it will by default fall back to English. And if also the language was not found, if it tries and doesn't find it will also fall back to English. So
okay.
When the docs become part of Node.js.org, it's the same thing. If I just put Node.js.org /API/buffers, .html, it will see, wow, this file doesn't exist. It will go to the Node.js.org /n /API/buffers.html. If I put fr, and there is a translated, buffers page already in French, it will load the French version. But otherwise, we'll just redirect back to en.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah. Does it make sense?
Yep. Perfect.
Ooh. Any other question, folks?
No, looks great. I would just also recommend preparing for some turbulence, getting folks to get used to it. But I think from developer point of view, I'll just use whatever is there, and it's looking great. So,
on your opinion, does this feel easy enough to get a contributor that is already versed in core to get a hang of it? Does that sound too complex, or if you have a good documentation, do you think that other contributors will not have a hard time getting started in this?
No, I'm of the opinion there will always, going to be people complaining because you move their cheese, right? Especially the long time folks. There might be people not. But yeah, so maybe prepare some transition guides or something, right? Just to ease their pain.
I think the specific question was how about even I definitely agree with that. The question is somebody new who's trying, a new collaborator. That's been one of the concerns raised as well. Can they easily figure out how to add in a new method or whatever that they want to add or fix in the docs?
Yeah. I think that definitely there, once, because there are multiple steps also, from implementation. Is first we are ironing out all the quirks of it once we from next gen we agree, and then there are steps of how to land this. First is by creating the conversion tool that will basically be part of the GitHub workflows. If I make a PR to Node.js/node, there will be a new workflow, basically that will check if the docs will work in the new format, so that we ensure that things are consistent. And then over the time, we will, have, tools that will transition to the new format and etc. gradually, But I think when we reach that point, it will be very important to have already transitioning, documentation, so new contributors can, and existing contributors, you can know how to get started with this. I have the feeling that even when we land this, there will be feedback cycles, and we will possibly have version 1.0.1, 1.0.2, this new tooling and new metadata format. I'm sure of it. And I'm sure of it that over the time we'll also find things that I didn't count for.
Unfortunately, we gotta drop off because the next meeting's gonna start and use the same stream. So
Gotcha. I also need to drop off to another meeting. But yeah,
okay.
We keep the continuation of this. So cool.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was really good.
Thank you. Thank you all then. Stay safe.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Right.